Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Hodson. I want to thank Professor Hahn for allowing me to come or at least record and speak with you all. So just want to kind of go quickly over what we'll be talking about today. So we'll kind of just start with a little bit of background about me. I know I'm just a face on your computer screen, but I know sometimes it helps to get to know that you're an actual person as well, not necessarily just a person on the screen. So then we'll talk about what is analytics and people analytics. Both very similar, but there are some pretty distinct differences as well. And kind of talking about the audience who needs to know people analytics. Maybe all of you are not dying to be on a people analytics team when you graduate. And so it still does have relevance to everyone to at least have some understanding of this. Then we'll talk about some of the different tools and technologies that are in the space right now. It is a newer space in the grand scheme of kind of corporate America and enterprise technologies. So there are some new fun things available. And then we'll kind of go through all the different, I guess, sections and examples of like what is people analytics. So kind of start reporting and then talk about some of the other different parts that you'll see in a usual people analytics team. So a little bit about me. Me and my wife are new parents. Daughter was born in January, so this is her on a computer screen. If anyone does any programming or coding, you may get the hello world joke. If not, just kind of ignore that part. We're animal people for sure. Have one dog now and 3 cats. Didn't want to litter the screen with too many pictures of animals. So then from a job standpoint, I work at AbbVie. It's a pharmaceutical company based out of Illinois. I am a remote worker, and I was remote before it was even cool with COVID. So I've been remote with various companies since 2018. And then on the side, also have an analytics consulting company that I partner with a former colleague on. So that's enough about me. So what is analytics? Obviously, this is going to be specific to people analytics, but people analytics and analytics is there's definitely a lot of overlap. So it's a lot of different definitions. So this is just one of them, kind of what you get from Wikipedia, pretty standard. You're going to have SaaS, so they're a company that basically sells products that are revolving around analytics. And then me, I try and simplify it a little bit. Basically, you take data and you use it to make decisions. So it can mean a lot of different things to different people. I ask this question to corporate professionals all the time, especially in the HR space. You'll get asked 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers. So rarely is it ever going to kind of be the same. But again, the reason that corporations and companies want to use data is you don't want to just kind of go off feeling, especially in the people analytics space. You do sometimes need to use that intuition and experience, but you're going to have a much better decision almost all the time if you can pair that with some type of data and analytics as well. So then getting more specific into the HR space, there's what is people analytics? So basically we're using data in the context of people. So Visier is where this is quoted from. They're a popular player in the people analytics space right now, but there are some pretty significant nuances that you see from a people analytics standpoint compared to marketing analytics or risk management analytics and all that you see there. So see this oftentimes on LinkedIn. It's very true. HR is one of the last areas in most corporations to truly adopt data and analytics and how they operate and what they do. So there are some interesting nuances that you'll start seeing in the people space. Governance is very important when you're talking about your employees and running analysis on them. There's a lot of ethics and things that you need to think about. So it is a hairier side and definitely a lot more human side of analytics compared to maybe some of the other areas where you're able to look at millions of customers potentially and just kind of make inferences about them. When you're talking about your employee base, sometimes you have to use some different approaches and think slightly differently. So it is really easy to do things poorly. So Amazon, this is a really famous example. If you guys have done kind of anything in the people analytics space or resume scoring space, this is a really popular article that probably is retold in slightly different ways all the time, but really it's what Amazon did is they built a model that looks at all the resumes and all the hiring decisions that they had in the past, and built a model to be able to predict what's going to happen into the future. So the problem that this was is they didn't account for bias in decisions that had already been made. So when they applied the model on top of this, the model was biased against women. So there are definitely, this is referenced all the time whenever a company thinks about how to use a model to automate decisions or help augment decision making. But this is again a really good example, especially when it comes from Amazon, who we think, okay, Amazon knows best. How could they make a mistake like this? They did. That kind of shows how it can be thorny, and definitely you want to learn from these things. So the positive out of this is now pretty much any model at any major corporation goes through very rigorous processes to make sure that this type of bias can be weeded out in different ways. So again, not great that this happened, but has served as really a massive learning for companies. So who needs to know about how to use data and analytics, and especially in HR? So I kind of use the frame of reference of creating versus consuming. The creators, the people actually on the people analytics team, the consultants, the actual analytics people, the data scientists, those are the people that are actually creating things. Whereas consuming, if you're not looking to kind of get into more of the data side, pretty much any role in HR nowadays needs to be able to consume data. And if they're not able to consume data, you definitely can fall behind. So especially as you're looking for jobs and looking for maybe different things you're wanting to upskill and be able to talk about in interviews, the ability to be able to be a business partner, be a sourcer, be an HR generalist, be a recruiter, and understand how to use data, that is massive right now. That's going to put you ahead of a lot of peers, or even superiors that have multiple years, many years of experience over you. So definitely one thing to consider if you are looking to go into an HR space. The more you can understand about how to consume and use data and use it for decision making, really the better that you'll end up being. So again, all levels of the organization, all types of roles in an HR context, really, it is really important to be able to learn. At our company, at all my other, at Allstate and Allianz and AbbVie, all of them have been focused on how do we upskill HR and how to be able to be better with data. Because if your people analytics team is 10 people and your entire HR organization is 200, it's a hard proposition to say like we're going to be able to be truly data driven when you have 10 people out of 200 who truly understand how to use data in your roles. So the graph on the bottom, or the numbers on the bottom, McKinsey's started putting a lot of weight behind this, as have the other large consulting companies. So 80% of executives are looking to be able to increase recruiting efficiency. So this is even before COVID and kind of the craziness that happened, and now the Great Resignation and everything that's being talked about there. Recruiting is incredibly difficult. Everyone's in demand, especially data type roles, technology type roles, things that people, all companies want. So being able to hire someone quicker, I don't know how much experience you have with this yet, but you'll definitely start figuring this out as you'll apply for a role. Sometimes you won't hear ever. Sometimes you hear back in 2 months, 3 months. And so being able to like quickly get candidates in and out of the process and progress with the ones that are the best, that's huge. And oftentimes, usually the standard is like 2 months. But a lot of that is just fluff and waste at this point. So there's a lot of opportunity to increase that efficiency. The other big focus right now is connecting HR to business outcomes or business productivity. So again, 25% want to focus on that. This chart's maybe a little outdated. This is a lot more of the focus now. How do they say we're going to use this HR data to increase sales, to decrease costs, those types of things. And then the last thing is attrition. This is a pretty good starting point. Attrition is very expensive. Often it's a hidden cost. You can't go to finance and say, this cost us this much money that you see on a line item. But some estimates of attrition costs are 1 to 1.5 times someone's salary. So you can start seeing that adding it up. When 10% is a normal attrition rate, that's a lot of money for really big companies, especially even small companies as well. So again, everyone needs to know how to use data. That's a really important piece. So just a couple of good examples of why is data important in decision making. So say you're hiring for call center roles, and your hiring manager that you're supporting is like, I need people with college degrees. I think that they have to have that to do this role. Well, you're automatically shortening your pool for people who would even consider your job and apply for it. So are you able to use data to help influence that hiring manager to say, hey, we actually have a lot of really great employees who don't have degrees and are really successful in this role. And so if you're able to open up and increase your candidate pool by probably double it, sometimes even triple it in a case like this, that's a pretty significant win. You're going to hire people faster. You're going to see more people that are most times going to, in the end, be better as well. And then like applicants and employees as well, disclosing their ethnicity and gender. So this is always a fun one sometimes when you're doing more some of the inclusive diversity reporting and things, is people like, oh, like how accurate can this be? I feel like a lot of people these days don't actually input this information or don't want to tell us. Many leaders say this. It's a very easy check, and most of the time the companies I've been at is you're well over 95% of people are actually putting their information into this field. So again, by a simple just look at the data, how much of it is blank, almost none of it in this case. A good example of how you can just use data, be able to say, get that feeling out of the equation and be able to say, hey, we actually know what the answer here is. So then from a technology standpoint, there's a lot of different technologies out there. Some are HR specific, some are not. So good old handy Excel can be used in a lot of contexts. A lot of immature or newer analytics functions are still using Excel. There are definitely better ways, but everyone knows how to use Excel for the most part in corporate America. So it's a launching point. Once you see companies start to get maybe a little bit more sophisticated, you'll start seeing things like Power BI and Tableau be used. So the BI tools where you create dashboards and help automate some of that and make things interactive for users. That's kind of that next step to be able to, again, display the data in a way that makes it easier for people to consume it. Then once you kind of get that next step up is programming languages, things where you have data scientists or more advanced analytics going on, where you're able to write code and have models built to be able to make decisions and be able to do analytics with. Then kind of sidestepping or even downstepping a little bit is data storage. So this is oftentimes a little less HR specific in general. Where you store data is normally where you store data. So AWS, Oracle, SAP, all the usual players in the data storage and data warehousing and database space are often where it is. The kind of nuance with this is there's often a lot of challenges and a lot of different HR systems. So if you want to understand the recruiting process and you're using one technology, but your employee data is all sitting in another, you need to be able to bridge that gap. And oftentimes that can be pretty difficult because the HR systems are not designed always to talk to each other, which creates a challenge. So then lastly, there are HR specific softwares available. Visier and Cruncher are two big ones, but it is becoming a space where there are more and more players in it. Really, my opinion on this is this has come out of there being really bad reporting systems in some of these HR specific platforms. So your applicant tracking systems, they have really bad reporting capabilities, and oftentimes the data needs so much cleaning and manipulating and changing to get it to a state where it's usable or even accurate sometimes. Requires a lot of legwork and money spent on the data storage, the BI tools, the programming languages to do that. So what these HR softwares are starting to do is they'll say, we'll take your data, we'll clean it, and we'll put it into our kind of prepackaged things, and also allow you to like customize different views and dashboards and things like that. So it is a very lucrative space. So they definitely charge a lot of money, but it is a really helpful tool. I think my perspective, I came up in the corporate world as more of a Tableau type person, and have progressed more towards the analytics space. So my initial inclination with things like Vizier and Cruncher was like, you can do this in Tableau or Power BI, but you start seeing that the power of basically these platforms that they have hundreds of clients and they're dedicated on developing just HR software, the things that they can do for the price, it would take an army of your own internal people to do it. So something like an Amazon that's really good at technology and has the scale, maybe that's worth it. But it's for some of the smaller companies, smaller, like less than 10 and 5,000, something like a Vizier or a Cruncher oftentimes can make sense, because for the price of a head count or two, you can basically get a product or a service that would probably cost you at least 5 to 6 to 7 headcount just to be able to build something that's maybe comparable. So my perspective has changed on it, but it is definitely a new and evolving space, and it continues to grow. So that's exciting. Vizier is probably the biggest player at this point. They are the industry leader when it comes to this. Their UI is incredible. They do a great job on helping people who don't understand data super well be able to use it. And that, especially in the HR space, as I kind of mentioned before, as you're searching for jobs, especially in the HR space, learn how to use data, because that's going to be a good way to set yourself apart. Since most people in HR still don't have a great grasp on how to use data, Vizier has put a lot of time on making it really intuitive and helping guide people through it. So really slick platform. So if you want to check that demo out, feel free. It's a cool platform. So what are the different categories? So people analytics has a bunch of different ones. So reporting is kind of where you want to start, from a what do you create? So then, that's out of order, but the number one thing you want to do is clean your data. So if you're doing reporting, if you're doing anything else, the first step is you need to have clean data. So if you constantly have to do the same thing over and over again, how do you create a dashboard that is able to refresh by itself and kind of operate on its own, and feel confident that that data is accurate? If your data is not clean, you can't do it. It also doesn't allow you to really progress down the maturity model that we'll kind of show later. So after you got reporting, or after your data is all clean, then you got reporting. The next step is going to be the analytics step. So again, kind of progressing in maturity, and within the analytics space, again, evolving in the people analytics category. But there's a bunch of different areas that we'll kind of talk through. So employee listening or surveys, especially with COVID, there's kind of a new trend. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Strategic workforce planning, this is still kind of a hot mess. Each company does it a little bit differently, but we'll kind of talk about what the general concept is. We won't get into kind of how it's executed very differently and maybe not as successful in a lot of places. Then we have predictive modeling. So AI, machine learning, those types of trendy buzzwords you've probably heard of before. Natural language processing. So in our HR space, we have a lot of words in text. So traditionally, if you have an employee survey with 20,000 people, you don't even use the text comments because you're not going to look through 20,000 comments. With NLP things, you're able to look through and kind of use data and make it, or create it as data, so then you can start using it for decision making. Then the last thing we'll talk about is O&A. So O&A is a really fun, it's a space that I've been able to play in a little bit, but it's a way to be able to look at how people interact, which ends up being, again, an interesting way of looking at things, and sometimes is maybe intuitive, but in the organizational sense, it actually is quite powerful. All right, so again, you need to have clean data. At all of my different companies, this is always kind of an ongoing challenge, is you have all of your we'll kind of talk about, so the ATS, the applicant tracking system where recruiters are working. All of that data is created by a recruiter. The recruiter is moving people through different steps and statuses of the recruiting process, and that doesn't automatically happen for most times. It's a recruiter doing it. So when you have a human needing to follow a process, that is not always going to be followed, unfortunately. That's a great example. And then even from a like employee perspective, when promotions are occurring, very common metric is promotion rates to kind of see how your workforce is developing and evolving. So promotion rates, you need to know how if someone's being promoted or not. That, oddly enough, a lot of companies, like, that's reliant on the manager selecting it from a drop-down field that says promotion. And so again, when you're relying on a human to follow a process, it doesn't always happen. So there's a lot of things and complexities that just have to be thought through. So processes to how the data is created is like a whole thing. A lot of teams have dedicated multiple people to be able to focus on this because it's so foundational to be able to be successful. So one note on this analytics maturity model, it sounds like your guys' textbook breaks it into 3 pieces. This, I break it into 5. I think, as you see, if you continue to play in the analytics space or do any reading, you'll see that there's very varying versions of it. All of them kind of say the same thing. And in this case, I think the 5 ended up fitting a little bit better for what we're talking about here. So reporting. So this is kind of towards the more basic end. We're just trying to understand what happened. So what are some examples of this? List of employees, headcount, termination rates, promotion rates. Again, just kind of the basics, what happened. There's not a lot of detail or anything under that beyond kind of this happened. There's no so what, there's no what should you do. Oftentimes done in Excel. Again, it's a lot easier to send someone an Excel workbook. Every company is going to have either Excel or maybe some just do Google Docs now, but they're all going to have some version of a spreadsheet that you can use. So again, reporting more of the what happened. It's a good starting point, but you definitely want to be able to progress towards that because you oftentimes won't get kind of the value out of analytics that you would normally get. All right, so employee listening, that's the kind of new fancy term, but we call it surveys, or most people would call it surveys. So kind of the joke here is it can be very long. A lot of companies will do this once a year still. And so it oftentimes, I think, sometimes can be upwards of 80 to 100 questions, which is quite a bit and can take a while. So the kind of the big thing right now with employee listening is looking at from a life cycle perspective. So understanding someone's age and gender and what it looked like through the recruiting process is one point, but actually asking them and getting some detail on things beyond that, way better and a little bit more insightful. So with that, you're able to start getting a little bit further down beyond what happened to maybe why it happened. So just some examples: recruiting survey, onboarding survey, engagement survey, exit survey, again, kind of hitting on those different life cycle pieces. The other thing I'll mention that's become a lot more popular, especially with COVID, is the pulse concept. So they'll randomly sample a number of people. So say you have an organization of 10,000 people, to use a round number, they'll randomly sample 300 a week and just kind of give them a really short, hey, how's it going, or whatever topic they want to focus on. So kind of the concept behind this is when you have a once a year survey, what happens if I'm having a crappy day? I'm having a terrible day and I'm like, oh, this sucks. So you're probably not getting the most accurate representation, but if you're kind of able to spread it out throughout time and across different people, and each person maybe gets it a few times a year, did you get all 80 questions answered? Maybe not. But did you get probably a more representative understanding of what people's sentiment and feelings are about something? Yes, yeah, probably. So again, this is employee listening is progressing towards the why did it happen piece versus what happened. So strategic workforce planning, the general concept behind this is kind of like supply and demand modeling. So you're saying, what is my supply? Who do I already have? Who could I upskill? Who could I hire? And then your demand is, what business initiatives am I doing? Example we'll talk through in a little bit is like, or actually we'll talk about it right now. Example, a really good example is automation. So say you're a production company and you're planning on hiring or creating a bunch of production lines that are more robotic, more automated. You're going to need fewer line workers and probably more technologists, more people who can fix the robots, program the robots, all of that. That's something that you want to be able to project out over time. So one really, I guess, humane and nice way of thinking about it is instead of having to lay a bunch of people off right away, can you over time try and like reduce that where you allow natural attrition to happen? So say line workers attrit at 15% a year. Try and think from a 3 to 5 year strategy so you're not having to lay everyone off. So you allow and maybe don't backfill those people, don't hire new people once people leave. So you're able to think about that from a humanity perspective. It's a little bit more humane and definitely better, but also from a company perspective, you're not paying severances, you don't have the ill will towards your company. And then on the flip side, if you just one day all of a sudden say, we need a bunch of robotics people, very expensive to hire, very hard to hire. Everyone wants them or they're highly in demand. So that becomes a very difficult task to just all of a sudden, if you have only a few, hire a bunch. So that kind of spans the proactive and again, optimization foresight sections there. Sometimes it can fit more into one versus the other. So now predictive modeling. So this can take on a lot of different forms. I'll loosely group them into like kind of two categories. You have like the regression side and then more of the machine learning and AI. Again, goal is not to kind of get into this too deeply, but there's not a lot of differences between them. It really is just kind of which tool you're going to use to be able to get to a similar outcome. And sometimes one problem requires one tool and another problem requires another. So the general concept here, though, is we're using the past to predict the future. So automatically, there's probably some things that are hard to predict, especially with the data you have. So you do have to kind of self-select on that as well. With some of the more machine learning approaches, there are definitely challenges with transparency. So model governance is a new huge topic where people definitely focus on this, where how do we make sure that people can feel good and comfortable with how decisions are being made if you're using your model to ultimately make decisions or assist with decisions. So a good example is predicting attrition risk. So again, if attrition is expensive for your company, or you want to understand how much you should be expecting, you can kind of think about it like this. So this is a decision tree approach. And so with that, kind of a simplified version of how it is, but maybe you're trying to say, okay, I build a model and then it determines that age is really predictive of if someone's going to leave or not. So if someone's over 65 years old, guaranteed all of the people. So on the far right, dark green is terminated. Everyone left. So then if they're less than 65, what happens? All right, well, if they're less than 60, it's pretty low chance, only 91%. So then that becomes, if anyone's less than 60 years old, I feel like it's probably pretty low risk that they're going to retire. Then when you start progressing, you again add layers and layers and layers. And so kind of this is where if you have a really complex problem, that's where some of the more like machine learning or AI approaches are really good. Whereas if you have maybe a simpler problem that's not as deep, some of the regression approaches end up maybe doing a little bit better. Again, kind of what you're trying to do really drives all this. And again, we're trying to be proactive here. Predictive analytics is what we're looking at from a maturity standpoint. So then NLP, so natural language processing. So again, I mentioned in HR, we have tons of text information, performance reviews, your peer reviews, survey comments, the like. So how do we take that information and make it so if you have 20,000 employees, you don't have to read through 20,000 comments to understand what's going on. So NLP, or natural language processing, is essentially what we're doing is we're taking words or sentences or paragraphs and we put them into a machine readable form. So more of a spreadsheet versus kind of a Word document. So there are tons of ways to do this. There are some really, really simple ways, and there are some extremely complicated ways. I'll talk through a really simple example, but on more of the extreme end, you have something called BERT. So basically it was trained on Google, Wikipedia, a bunch of different books. It's got a ton of information in it. And so like that's, when you train something on the internet, obviously you would expect that it to be really good at understanding language. So the example I'll use is just a simple one here. So kind of the process and how to think through it. And again, the simple and the most complicated ones kind of share this same methodology. So you're not going to be an expert on NLP, but you'll have a general idea of like, okay, how can a machine read words? So we take this sentence, I went to Winona State and majored in human resources. And then essentially what we're doing is we're taking out those like unimportant words. So I, to, and we're just putting in each column the words. And then each time it appears, you get a 1. So if you had a second sentence, I went to St. Cloud State University, or I went to University of Minnesota Duluth, you would have in the Winona, you would have 0. And then in the Duluth example, you would have a 1. So basically that's how a machine can read text in a very simple, again, simple form. So just some ways that I've seen it used and actually done it: resume grading, resume scoring, looking at surveys, looking at job descriptions. Again, it's a way to help automate things, but also kind of remove a degree of subjectivity to it as well. By no means is it perfect though. So this is definitely on the more complicated, complex end of things when we talk about analytics. But again, it's still possible and done actually quite frequently in the HR space in particular because of how much text data there is. So then we'll talk about O&A. So if you're not familiar with organizational network analysis, this is really like the best example that you can think of. So on the left-hand side, that's traditionally how people view kind of the information flow of companies. Suzanne is the leader of this group, therefore kind of the information would flow through her. On the right-hand side is the O&A organizational network perspective, is how important are people in communication. So say that the size of the dot is number of communications and the different lines are who's communicating with who. That gives you a very different picture. Suzanne's actually pretty small. Nora and Mitch, who are just kind of employees in the middle of their org structure, they're actually really important. A lot of connections going on. So think about what happened. What if Nora left? People like Lisa, Samuel, Elise would all kind of lose their connections to people. So again, it's one of those things where you're kind of flipping how you look at things, and it is in a way intuitive when you explain this to someone who's like a leader. They're like, well, of course I want to understand how people connect, and sometimes people are really good at understanding what it is without O&A, and sometimes people are really bad at it as well. Especially with COVID happening. So when everyone were remote in the corporate world, this was like an O&A's dream. Everyone's communications were happening online in some way. So everyone's meetings, emails, IM, everything was happening. Pretty much all communication was happening via that method. So it became really popular, especially during COVID. However, like one way to collect this information is via your emails, your IMs with other people. So there is that big brother creepy factor. By no means is it like a people analytics person is reading your IMs between someone. That's not not the use case here, but there is definitely that privacy way to consider it as well. So here, just another example to think about again. You kind of change where Cole is centered to connecting these two different teams. But if you see Cole in the org chart, kind of in the left, bottom left there, compared to there, like that's, you don't get the same story looking at the left versus the right. All right, so this is again kind of the what don't you know. You're discovering new information that's not even, you're not summarizing or aggregate, you're almost creating new information in this way. So again, really cool space that continues to evolve and change as privacy concerns come up, but also use cases continue to present themselves. All right, so kind of in summary, people analytics is analytics, but it is different in the fact that we're talking about humans, and so there are different considerations. Ethical, definitely ethics is a big part of it when you're talking about humans, sometimes the people that you're working with as well. So there's just a lot of different complexities to think about in that space. Probably explains part of the reason, at least, why HR is one of the last to really truly embrace and adopt the use of data. The other point, again, if you're in this class, I assume you have some HR connection, and maybe some of you will go into a career in HR. All HR professionals need to understand how to at least use data, how to consume it, because if you don't, that's something that a lot of areas are looking for, and it will evolve at some point. So a good way to put yourself ahead of people who already have more experience than you is to be able to understand how to consume analytics. And then again, it's a new space. There are already a wide range of topics and techniques that you can use and leverage in the space. It'll continue to change. It has in the last few years already. So again, there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but it'll continue to evolve and change. Well, thank you for listening. Hopefully this didn't feel too long. Hopefully it provided something a little bit fresh and different for you. But again, feel free to reach out. I'll provide all my contact information if you want to reach out. I'm always happy to connect and have a conversation and answer any questions you may have. Awesome. Thank you.